and welcome to the second edition of the French Cinémathèque, a collaboration between the Federation, the Alliance Française USA, and Telescope Film. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Justine Barda, and I am the founder and CEO of Telescope Film, a website for international film and TV. We offer a database of over 500,000 international films and series with links to where to watch them in the US. We also have a dedicated page on the site for French film and TV with information about what's new and what's popular from France, as well as curated selections. We are delighted to be collaborating with the AFUSA, the largest Alliance Française network in the world, helping 25,000 learners of French each year learn French, live French, and love French. You will find links to more information about both AFUSA and Telescope Film in the chat in just a little bit here. I'll put those in the chat. The French Cinémathèque will take place on the fourth Monday of every month. Next month, on April 22nd, in recognition of Justine Trier's Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay, we'll be talking about her film, Anatomy of a Fall. Before we get started, I just have a few brief housekeeping notes. Please keep yourselves muted when you're not speaking and stay on speaker view. To ask a question, please raise your hand using the Zoom feature at the bottom of your screen in the reactions section, or you can put your question in the chat. If there are technical issues, you may want to leave the Zoom and then sign back in after a couple minutes using the original Zoom link. This event is being recorded for our YouTube channels, and the total runtime is 1 hour. And with that, I'd like to introduce our facilitator, Aude Hesbert, director of the Villa Albertine in Los Angeles and French film industry veteran. Over to you, Aude.
Thank you very much, Justine, and thank you all for joining us today for a new session of the French Cinémathèque. I'm happy to recognize familiar faces among us today, and it's great to see you again and to have newcomers as well. While I was rewatching the film last week, Saint Omer, that we're going to talk about today, I realized that the 3 films we have selected so far all address the question of being a woman in French society today, and that they are all resonating and echoing from one another in many different ways. They are all fictions based on true stories and trying to approach the truth of what it is to be a woman, both biologically and socially. Saint Omer was the winner of the Silver Lion at Venice Film Festival in 2022, and like the Night of the 12th, it received the César for Best Film a year earlier and was chosen to represent France for Best International Feature for the Oscars. Alice Diop's stunning narrative feature debut is a very unusual and radical courtroom drama procedural. The script, which she wrote with her editor, Armita David, and famous French writer Marine Diaye, is drawn from a real-life news story that shook France in 2016 and is based on court transcripts from the trial of Fabienne Cabou, who received a 20-year prison sentence for drowning a baby. The character of the teacher who attends the trial is based on the filmmaker herself, who, captivated by the case, attended the trial that followed. Saint Omer, for those who don't know, is a small town in northern France. At the center of the film are 2 Black women, Laurence Colly, played by newcomer Gouslagui Malanda, a young Senegalese immigrant accused of killing a 15-month-old child by leaving her to drown in the ocean, and Rama, played by Kajimi Kagame, a Senegalese French professor and writer working on a project about the media myth. Alice Diop, the filmmaker, is the daughter of Senegalese immigrants, and she came to filmmaking after studying colonial history at the University of La Sorbonne. She comes from the documentary world, and for the record, because I love pulling threads from a film to another, she's an absolute fan of the films of Frederick Wiseman. For those who were with us for this first session of Rebecca Zlotowski's film, Frederick Wiseman is a famous documentarist, and he was the guy who played the gynecologist in The Children of Others. Alice Diop directed two remarkable films prior to this one. The first is called Toward Tenderness. It's a short film about four young men from the Paris suburbs who talk about their masculinity and desires through very poetic monologues. Then her second feature is a documentary too. It was in 2021 and it was an observational tour of the so-called margins of Paris, home to many immigrants, in which she crafts a philosophical anti-portrait of the nation of France. Though Saint Omer is her first foray into fiction, she sees it as a continuation and extension of the rest of her work, which gives us a good opportunity and a good basis to start our discussion today, I think. And to open it up to you, I'd like to ask you a first question, because this film is obviously a courtroom drama, a very classic genre in the history of film, but this is a very unusual one. And I would like to ask you, how do you felt it was unique, and how do you see it as a connection with the documentary? Just don't hesitate to comment on maybe on the first impression you had on the film, because it's really unusual, I guess. I saw someone raising his hands. I can't see it. I lost.
It's me, Aurelia.
Well, yeah. Good to see
Hi,
you.
hi, Aude.
Hi.
The very first impression that I had was, I guess, the first scene where you hear the music, you see the dark scene, you know something bad's about to happen. And then we get to, in my mind's eye, I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be a very dramatic, action-packed, conflict-driven film. But then as it goes on, you notice that it all takes place in the court, and that even though there's not a move from scene to scene, the dialogue and the characters looking either straight at the camera or just looking straight created the drama necessary to keep me interested throughout the film. And that is very, very unique, and told me of why this film is so well regarded.
Yes. Thank you very much for your comment. And how did you felt about the way Laurence, the main character, was speaking in the film?
It was very monotone, but her eyes spoke for her. I felt
that's a good way of saying it.
Yes. Like, she never really moved. She was standing up, like her body never moved, but her eyes spoke volumes. And even when her lips would be trembling, or you can sort of see her cheeks trembling, you know, and you felt, and the fact that the majority of the time, she was very soft-spoken and just kept saying, I don't know. It kind of led into the narrative that she was out of her mind. She kind of looked zombie-like at times, but yet I think the interaction with the judge also created drama, because the judge never got angry at her or screamed at her like you see in some courtroom dramas. It was more like you could see that she was empathetic and really wanted to hear her story. And it was that dramatic tension that is, okay, so what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? But I think her eyes more than anything. And another thing I noticed is her shirt was the same color as the back panel. So you really had to focus on her face.
Yeah. That's a good.
Yeah, and really connect to her face and listen attentively. There was nothing else to look at. I noticed that they made that choice too.
Thank you very much for this insight. Well, yeah, and I see Sheriff and Zainab raise their hands.
Yes, I think. Hi, I think this movie is not a court drama at all.
Mhm.
And when I read about what the movie maker said about why she did this movie, I realized that this is an artist, the movie maker, which had a very deep emotional experience witnessing the trial going on. And you see that in the movie. It's not only it's two personalities, that one personality is influencing the other and making her think of her own problem, not what is going on. What, in fact, in one of her interviews, Dion said, I want to quote her here. She said, "I don't understand her because I didn't understand her at the trial, and I still don't understand her now. And because I don't understand her, that makes me ask questions about myself." So it's a personal experience that made this movie. She couldn't make it as a documentary because she couldn't film in the courtroom. So, but she had to do it as a narrative film after that.
Thank you very much. Coming to this idea of documentary-like film, do anyone want to talk about the details that make you think it is a documentary in terms of filmmaking, mise en scène, direction, compared to a like very classical theatrical courtroom drama, for example? Think of the pace of the film, the dialogues, the way the camera is always very frontal and never the camera moves sometimes, but not that much. And that so anyone noticed any details that connects the film to documentary? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't know how to raise my hand.
It's okay, we see you.
I have a rather technical question. As looking at the film as a documentary, the American voir dire system, the lawyer talk to the person in the film, they just kind of seem to look them in the face and choose them. So was that just an editing thing that she didn't put in, or is it just the way they choose jurors in France?
No, I think it's really a choice of a filmmaker to do that.
To not show the actual questioning and answer.
Yeah. Which is not, I mean, you could link it to documentary or not. I mean, it's always like reality and fiction are always like very tricky things to handle. But of course, I think what really makes it different from like a performative drama, like where the lawyers like are very actors, like bringing a show on stage. Here we have nothing like that. Everything is very, very, very brute and very, very austere. And there's no performance in the American way of performing, like it's like the total anti-studio system way of playing. And I'd like you to really try to comment on the way actors are playing in this film, because it's not only very different from an American movie, but it's also from any classic French or international movie. Let's focus on the
more
character.
like,
For example, let's focus on the character of Lawrence. What would you expect, like from a stereotype of a mother, like having killed her child? Oops, sorry.
Aurelia has her hand up.
Okay.
Yes. as the mother who has killed her child, you would expect her to either be remorseful or angry or show some kind of stronger emotion, and she was very monotone throughout, not until the end when she cried. It was like, oh, she's fine. Like I wanted her to cry. And then I finally was like, okay, she finally gets it, or she finally couldn't hold it any longer. Maybe she was, at times I was questioning if she was holding it or didn't want to be emotional because she wanted to seem like she lacked emotion, and so there was some other force that caused her to commit this crime. But as you learn more about her and the judge questions her about her upbringing and her entire history, you realize that she's a victim of her circumstances, and it kind of has led her to make desperate choices that just keep leading her down a darker and darker path to where she is now. And the way she speaks or the way she doesn't move reflects that very much. It's like in her life, even though she moved, she kind of stayed in that linear, unsafe, desperate decision making, and that's very much reflected in her way of speaking, her way of dressing. I mean, nothing stood out. Just plain person that you would walk, next to down the street and maybe even not notice her. And besides, I think it was the husband or the boyfriend, I can't recall if it was a husband or boyfriend. You really don't see a reaction from anybody, not the jurors, not the people in the audience. So it really, I think, also creates a pause and a moment for us to think about what's going on. Like if there's not a lot of noise in the background, if there's not a lot of action, then it makes you concentrate on what they're saying and then think and reflect yourself. I found myself doing that a lot, which I didn't expect at all. And I was like, I think they give you that space to think, to reflect, and which makes you even more invested in the film.
Yes, thank you very much. I see Sylvia has her hand up. Sylvia, do you want to say anything?
Yes, in reference to the documentary thing, the film starts with a documentary of women again being judged and being on trial. So I thought, and Duras trying to make their person, make the thing, more palatable, just by focusing on the woman. So she, the professor was actually playing Duras in the courtroom. And another thing that I wanted to say is that at no time they are talking about postpartum depression, which I think that could have been, not that she didn't have other reasons, but it could have been an element in the decision of killing her child.
Yes, yeah, definitely an hypothesis. Coming back to the reference to Marguerite Duras, I don't know if anyone is aware of that film Hiroshima, Mon Amour, that was shown at the beginning of the film. So this film is about, it's not about, but in this film we can see the women in France being shaved, being punished and humiliated because they collaborated with the German army. And how do you think this scene resonates with the one of with the story of Laurence in the film? I can't
think,
see and yeah, please. Please, Sylvia, you had, I'm sorry, I can't see anyone. Sylvia, do you want to comment on that?
Well, I just wanted to say that there is a parallel. There's something parallel between the two scenes. The women being tried and being humiliated for something that, you know, goes beyond probably has medical reasons maybe that, you know, kind of push her to do that. That's one of the worst crimes that a woman can be accused of. So, you know.
Yeah. I think what Marguerite Duras is doing with her words is giving a dignity to those women who've been humiliated in such a dire way, and what Alice Diop is trying to make, despite we, as you said earlier on, we will never understand exactly the mystery of her gesture. She wants to give this woman a dignity. Beyond the worst crime you can imagine. So through art and through filmmaking or writing, I think there's like some kind of transcendence to try to understand what is impossible to understand. Probably is one of the interpretations you can give to that little film we see at the beginning. Let's go back to the other character of the film that is much more silent than Laurence. It's Rama. Anyone would like to describe her character? So let's go to a more precise question. Has anyone noticed the use of mirrors in the film? I'm sorry, I can't see. I'm afraid I have a technical issue.
Aude, are you only seeing yourself, or I mean, do you have? Can you see everyone?
I can't see everyone.
You may need to put your. You may need to select gallery view from view in the upper right corner. In the meanwhile, though, it looks like Karen. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, there was a really striking scene where Rama was sitting next to her mother on the bed, or I think, and there was a mirror. That was the only one I remember from the film, but there was the frame of the mirror was sort of going across Rama's body or torso in a diagonal way. And I think of when I see mirrors, you know, that there's some kind of duality, there's some kind of split in the character. But that was just so kind of clear cut and obvious that it didn't show her at the same time as her image in the mirror, but this sort of piece of wood going across her body, just sort of indicating this severing maybe of their relationship. Maybe there were other mirrors that I don't remember.
There's one scene where you can see she's watching herself in the mirror, and then with the editing, you go straight to the trial and have this very frontal shot of the face of Laurence, when you can see that all their faces resonate, and of course she in some ways identify with the victim in the trial. And there are other little details that can, of course, nothing is said in the film, even though it's a very talkative film. In that relationship, everything remains silent, but there are many signs of their relationship, and the way the journalist is like projecting herself in the woman in court. Think of their relationship to their mothers. Both of them have a difficult relationship to their mothers, and both of them are pregnant and hide their pregnancy to their mothers. Yeah, I see Kathy has raised her hand.
I just wanted to say, I don't know if I was projecting, but I felt like Rama was like the look on her face when she was deep in thought was like sometimes we, you know, maybe during a pregnancy it's more common, we think about the very worst thing that can happen with our pregnancy or with our children. And in this particular case, she's watching like the very worst thing that can happen. And I felt like they were putting that fear in me. Like I was feeling her fear that, my God, could this happen to me? And the fact that she had a lot of similarities where she wasn't telling anyone about her pregnancy and hiding it. Like, was she going down that path? Was she going to wind up in that same place? Could she kill her own baby? That's what I felt like they were telling me.
Yeah. I think it's a total right way to understand it. And also, those two women studied philosophy, but one of them is successful, she's a teacher, and the other way went wrong. So I think it's like a projection of ourselves who could go the wrong way also. Renee, I see you raising your hand.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the mirror quality. I think one of the most interesting sequences in the film is when her mother, looking back, is watching herself in the mirror as she gets dressed, as she puts on her jewelry. This woman is so self-focused. So you sense the distance from, and especially when Laurence comes in the room and see, but the arrogance and the way this woman sees herself, so totally distanced from her daughter. I thought that was like an amazing scene in and of itself. It almost made her daughter irrelevant.
Yeah. Kathy, you still have your hand up. Do you want to?
Oh, well, did you guys talk about the comment the judge made about female genital mutilation?
But please do comment on that.
Excuse me?
You can comment on that. We didn't talk about it.
Oh, I was just really floored when he made the comment that I don't remember exactly what it was in reference to, but that like female genital mutilation has its place in that culture and it's like culturally relevant. And I just thought about all the times men have allowed or instigated, abuse against women that is culturally relevant and culturally appropriate. And I'm thinking, this is the man who's going to be making a decision about this young woman's future, where he thinks female genital mutilation has a place in some society. It just really, it made me feel, it's making me feel right now very angry.
But the judge the judge in the film is a woman, and she
No.
will have the last.
Oh, who was the male?
It was the expert witness, I believe. And it just kind of showed how out of it he really was.
Yeah,
I think that was.
Exactly.
Can I ask a follow-up question about that? I guess the way I interpreted that scene was that he was diminishing the value of her claim that she was having a really rough time or magic was involved. I thought he was trying to diminish the value of magic as her sort of claim as to her mental state. But if she had used something like, female genital mutilation as something that really made her life horrible, then he would have thought that was more of a valid defense. So I guess maybe I just had a little different take on that scene. Not that he was justifying FGM, but more that he would have seen that as a valid defense as opposed to magic. But
that's not how it came across to me. I would have to watch the scene again to see which way, but maybe I jumped to a conclusion.
I think you can have many interpretations. And by the way, I'd like to ask you, how do you understand, because for me, it's not that obvious, that this woman is such a brilliant student. She studies Wittgenstein, who's probably the most difficult philosopher to understand. So she definitely has a brilliant mind. But her defense goes with magic, sorcery, witchcraft, which is quite hard to understand from our point of view, because she's a very rational and intellectual woman. And the only thing she has to say about her crime is that she was possessed. So how do you understand that?
Zainab, looks like you have your hand up.
I think the kind of person this is typical. I think people come with their baggage, and what they acquire later in life sometimes sinks in. I mean, goes to the core, and sometimes it doesn't. But I think also that what makes her case universal is that many women, they don't think of killing, of course, their children, but many of them think how great it would be if I didn't have this burden. And of course, this is the extreme case. This is the extreme case. Some are selfish and they just live their lives, but most are. And then, of course, the social penalty. You can't tell who is selfish and who is really sacrificial, but because of the social penalty. And this case of that Senegalese woman is the extreme case. I think she just took things in her own hands. Maybe this is her acquired self, but her indigenous self, her upbringing, her baggage, and both are in conflict with each other.
Kathy, do you want to add your own interpretation on that? Aurelia?
Yes. From someone who's somebody who's familiar with African culture, I know that it can be generational, where instead of self-reflecting or inspecting as to what may be the cause of something, usually it goes to a third party or outside sources. We blame the outside, be it, I'm unlucky, somebody has done voodoo on me, or whatever it is. There's magic sources. Usually comes from not being self-aware, or even sometimes condemned from questioning what is or what your community says is. And especially, I think for her, she says of examples where she wanted to speak up and she was immediately shut down. Her dad even ostracized her because she didn't want to pursue philosophy. And so it seemed to me that she really believed that there was black magic involved, and that she really didn't have full awareness of what she was doing when she committed the crime. And even as I was hearing her, I was like, how could you not know that? But at the same time, I empathize with her. I was like, because it's generational. She heard it from her parents, her grandparents, her community. And instead of saying, maybe I should have taken account of what is going within me, or that I'm having some too much stress, that it's showing up in different ways and affecting my daughter. If she never saw that happening in her community, how was she gonna take personal account of with the mental distress that she was going through? So I've witnessed and seen people really believe that there are external parties that are to blame when things go wrong, and instead of assessing what's going on within ourselves or self-reflect, it's easier always to blame the third party.
Thank you. I see Dennis as a point. I don't know, Dennis, if you want to speak up, or shall I read your comment? Dennis said, I think because she couldn't explain to herself why she did what she fell back on her cultural upbringing to explain everything. I think that's quite relevant. For me, there's no real answer to this sorcery mystery, because infanticide will forever remain a mystery, even for herself. And since she's superiorly intelligent, I think this is the only thing she can bring up to the jury to make them understand what she did. And maybe, I suspect she's quite using that like stereotype of African culture to defend herself, but that she even herself doesn't, I don't know, it's just an hypothesis. She doesn't even believe in it. Because
Yeah, I agree with you.
the whole story and the whole purpose of the film is really that there is no rational answer to the horrific gesture of killing her own baby.
No, and I
It
don't
is-
think she could rely on the jury understanding sorcery and magic, because that is not part of the French culture as far as I understand.
Yeah.
I think she was making a stretch to absolve herself of some of the guilt, because it has to be somebody else's fault. It can't be me.
Yeah, probably. Jim? It'd be nice to have a male point of view on that issue. Jim, did you raise your hand?
Let's see, I think you're muted still.
Hi, sorry, it's me, it's not Jim.
It's okay.
But towards the end, there was a point where the judge read from the transcript from the jail, and I think that throws shade on this whole theory that she believes that it was a source of sorcery, where she says to her mother, I think they're believing it. I think they're buying into the sorcery and the occult. And so I have doubts whether or not she actually thought that that was what caused it.
Good point.
And
Point.
if I may say something, I also, from experience with villagers in West Africa, living in a village, the strength of juju, as it was called, the sorcery that they're calling it, is just as powerful as religion is in this country, and changes the mindsets. And particularly to the extent there's logic in her mind that she's been trained or educated with, there's still in the back, things in us that things get bad late at night going to bed, I pray. It's still part and parcel. And I find it interesting, in her case, they call it sorcery. In cases in this country in courts, it's God-fearing religion. I'm not against any of it, just saying the inability to recognize it's different, but a lot of things are different from the world we live in, but are still not that different. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, to go back to a more optimism, I'd like you to comment, if possible, on the last beautiful speech of her lawyer, which resonates like an incantation. And what is she using to fight for her client, to defend her client? Anyone would like to talk about this speech about what it means to be a woman? Junico?
Yes, hold on, I think I can turn on my camera. I was having difficulty with my camera. I hope I can get it to work. Okay. Yes, I wanted to talk about that. I also wanted to go back, and I wanted to talk about the drowning of the baby, because I'm by no means an expert in any kind of indigenous practices or beliefs, but I do know that there are Polynesian cultures, for example, who would drown their babies if they had a blemish, because they believed that this blemish would make them imperfect and that they would be cursed for the rest of their lives. And it seems harsh. I think even Hawaiians a long time ago would do that. So the idea about these beliefs and these primitive ideas, they go way back, and I'm sure it affects a lot of indigenous people, even into modern day society. And they may think themselves to be modern, but then these things create divisions in their thinking or in their mindsets or mentality. And women also have that because it's hard. Women came up pretty much as chattel. They were basically property. They had no possession over themselves, their bodies. And Indigenous people, the same thing. They had no possession of themselves. And it kind of creates this division where this separateness, where you're almost like looking at yourself from a distance and never really possessing yourself. And her attorney speech about the chimera is like you are a shadow of what you would like to be. You would like to have possession of yourself. You'd like to have possession of your psyche and your mentality and your life, but you don't. And it makes you want to distance yourself, from your life. And that shadow speech was very impressive to me, because I think that it happens in so many ways. There are schisms in individual psyches. And I'm sure psychologists would probably know more about this than I would. But and you see it in her demeanor all the time. There's a kind of a stoicism in her, almost as if she has distanced herself from her own life, like she's a spectator of her own life. And then it reminded me so much of Sylvia Plath and the Bell Jar, and all these different stories about women having split personalities, and kind of these are like, I guess, what you might call the fallout from societal structure and judgment upon people. Everything that society does, the more freedoms it takes away from you, the more schisms it creates in your psychology. And until it might look like madness to the outside world, but this fracturing of your mentality, it's actually a cause and effect. It's not mad. It's it might be an insane reaction to an insane world.
Yeah. That's the answer of insanity to insanity. I'm just reading in the chat that several people had their hands up and I didn't see them. So please don't hesitate to raise your hands if you want to come back to any topic. And we can come back to the pleading speech of the lawyer at the end, if anyone wants to talk about it.
Phyllis, I think you had your hand up earlier. Is that right? Oh, I think you're muted.
But it wasn't about the end of the movie. It was, I had a really hard time rationalizing how distant she seemed from what she had done. And yet the judge, I think it was the judge who mentioned more than once how well she took care of her child. And I'm curious about that she could seem so distant and yet care so well for this child she was with this child for what, was it 17 months? Is that the number that came up somewhere? I don't know.
I'm not.
I don't know if anybody else was perplexed by that.
15, maybe?
15 months, okay.
I think it is the whole purpose of the film to highlight this complexity and this paradox that she can be both a good mother and getting to this tragic end of killing her own kid. And the whole thing is to understand, and I think we'll never have an answer, except the very universal answer that the lawyer is giving. That's why I wanted us to discuss about it, because it's I think the answer is more poetic than really rational. But I see that Jay and Jessica have something to say. Jay or Jessica, I don't know.
Hi, I'm Jessica. Yeah, nice to join the group.
Hello.
I wanted to talk about with the film, there's really a callback to Euripides' Medea, the tragedy. And you just said tragic, right? And I think, Medea was a foreigner and Jason brought her home and she was very wise. She had all this wisdom. She like the protagonist has like understanding of Wittgenstein and all these philosophers. And she crosses cultures. She literally crosses the ocean, Medea, with Jason, like our protagonist here in the film. And when she's there, everything's fine until Jason cheats on her, and then she's completely isolated and she's completely alone. And she, as retribution, she kills her children. And I mean, I see it as poetic. I don't see it as it definitely made a difference that she was so alone. She had no community. She was so isolated. And there's a call out to Pasolini at one point in the film. So I think it's layering the ideas of tragedy and poetry. And when she puts her baby on the shore, it's almost like this symbolism of the ocean between where she had come from and where she went, and how she wanted to go back. She had no way of going back, and she was so lonely as a foreigner. And I think as it regards the relation to the mother, I mean, this is what happens. You can never go back to that full and complete relation. It's this psychoanalytic principle, that feeling of completion. But in this case, she literally puts her on the shore as if, she could like take her back to Senegal.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for this insight. I think everybody has his own answer about this mystery and complexity of a human being. And that is probably the sense of the lawyer's defense. Like we're all monsters, we're all terribly human, especially us women, bearing traces of our daughters inside us forever. And this biological and almost poetical and philosophical answer will never be really palpable and tangible, but it's the only answer we can get to that mystery. Thank you, Jessica. Before we leave the floor for an ending, the closing to. Oh, sorry, I'm losing my mind. I just wanted to say a word about an important reference in the film we haven't talked about. It's the reference to a filmmaker called Robert Bresson. Has anyone heard of that director, filmmaker before? I'm just curious. Because Robert Bresson is a major filmmaker in not only French film history, but film history, I guess. He's also an important critic, and he dedicated a whole book about the art of cinematography against the art of cinema, which is quite complex, but I'm pretty certain that Alice Diop has seen many of his films, and especially that film called Jeanne d'Arc, which is about this woman fighting, Le Procès de Jeanne d'Arc, which is also a trial film. It's a silent film, and it's absolutely amazing and beautiful. And it's about this woman hearing voices and fighting for herself against a world of men. And this film deeply resonates with Alice Diop's film, and especially in the way she portrays her character in a very frontal way and in a very detached way of acting, very frontal without any emotion, but the emotion comes from inside and from the very anti-dramatic way of playing. So if you don't know this filmmaker, I really encourage you to discover him, and I'm sure you'll see many references to this film.
Let's see, I think Kathy had her hand up earlier. Kathy, did you still want to speak?
Oh, well, I did have my hand up. Somebody had mentioned postpartum depression, and what I was thinking during the film was it sounded like postpartum psychosis, which is a very extreme form of postpartum depression and can last quite a while. 15 months still seems a little bit long, but there's no reason why this couldn't have been related. And I was surprised because I'm an OBGYN. I was surprised that there wasn't, unless I missed it, a medical expert who came in to testify on her abnormal thought processes, this, seeing visions and hearing voices before the baby was born, and that maybe she had a psychiatric diagnosis that, that was missed. Well, she also had no care during her pregnancy, essentially. So, and somebody said that science to the ignorant is like perceived as magic. So you've got a society who sees hearing voices and seeing visions as, magical and like normal, when really there could be a scientific explanation to her killing her baby.
You're right, there's no expert.
Sorry, my daughter's giving me the quote right now.
You're right, there's no such expertise in the film, and I don't know why. Probably it's not a thing that the filmmaker wanted to explore. And maybe her answer is more irrational and artistic than really scientific. And that brings me to another shot which I find very beautiful in the film. It's a very short sequence where the camera is no longer in the courtroom but outside the courtroom, and elevates itself in the sky and goes along a church, the wall of a church. So I think this elevating shot is definitely a dialogue between the what's happening in the courtroom and the point of view of the filmmaker. She's really on the side of a kind of a spirituality and a universality about the complexity of being a woman and a mother. And we haven't talked about a very crucial subject in the film, but it's a good point we haven't talked about it. But the very first scene of the film is quite unusual for a French film. The fact that a Black woman is a teacher in a very prestigious university is not that frequent in French cinema. Did it strike you, or was it like very... I'm happy if you felt like it was very common, but unfortunately it's not.
Let's see, Zainab's had her hand up for a little while. Zainab?
It's Sharif this time. Well, just a comment on the lady who said about the psychiatric examination in the actual trial, in the actual case of Fabienne Cabou. There was an examination by a psychiatrist, and she was declared paranoid, but well enough to stand trial. And just for to inform the group, if they don't know, the verdict was 20 years in prison. The final verdict of the actual case was imprisonment for 20 years, which then in the appeal was reduced to 50 years.
Thank you, Sheriff, because I didn't have this information. Zainab? Yeah?
I think that what you said just now about the fact that she is a Black woman, this compounds the complexity of the case, definitely, in a predominantly white society, or if not predominantly, I mean, they are the people who are looked up to. And no matter how educated she is, and no matter how all her credentials, she is still a woman, and a Black one, and alone. So this compounds the complexity of the whole. And I think the lady mentioned Medea. I think this also was one, I mean, sort of a theme in Beloved, Toni Morrison's novel, that she killed her own daughter. And with this particular case, a postpartum depression can go bad. As the lady who was talking, it's psychosis. And that's why she looks ever so withdrawn. There are people who are schizophrenic, and the only thing that shows is their withdrawal. They are always withdrawn, over withdrawn, not shy, not anything like that, or antisocial. They are totally withdrawn. So together, all these things add to the complexity of the situation. As for the judge, I have to say, I love the judge. She was trying to help her so much in the film, but I don't know if I understood it correctly or not.
Oh, there's no good way of understanding, and you're right if you if you felt it that way. Thank you very much, Zeynep, for that final remark. And time is running, and there would be so much to say about this deep film, but I will leave the floor to Justine to finish up this session.
Sure. Apologies to those of you who had things to say that we didn't get to tonight. And thank you so much to everyone for your terrific ideas and for exploring them with us. Thank you also, of course, to Aude. As I mentioned, next month's French Cinémathèque will take place on April 22nd, the fourth Monday of the month. And the film will be Anatomy of a Fall, directed by Justine Triet. I just put a link to that film in the chat. We'll be sending out more information about that shortly, and we look forward to seeing you in April. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you.